Welcome to our Sharing Circle group podcast number 3. My name is David. We have 4 people around the table for today's podcast and a few others in the room. Our dialogue format is a little different today. Our focus will be on the one topic in the form of a question. What is the difference between intelligence and wisdom? As we explore this topic from different perspectives, we may discover the value of a wise quotation. Humanity is far too clever to survive without wisdom. So the question again is, what is the difference between intelligence and wisdom? I'll start our topic off with a little reference. It's to something I remember from many years ago. It was a dialogue between Krishnamurti and a scientist. And the scientist says to Krishnamurti, "It takes a great deal of intelligence to design a nuclear submarine." And Krishnamurti's response was, "True intelligence would never design a nuclear submarine." So that starts the ball rolling. I'll hand the topic over.
Well, certainly intelligence and wisdom are very different. And for me, wisdom comes from the spaciousness. It doesn't come from the thought processes. I always remember that Peter Ustinov said a wonderful thing. He said that those who get to the top are usually those without enough intelligence to realize they should have stayed at the bottom. But I think actually it would be better if you used the word wisdom instead of intelligence, because I think, it's as in Steve Taylor's book, what is it called? The Disconnected, where he outlines very clearly how people with their intelligence get the way to the top, but there's very little wisdom there. And of course, there's a lot of very intelligent people at the top of organizations in all fields, but there's not necessarily enough wisdom. A few weeks ago, I was scrolling through YouTube, and I came across a certain well-known American politician being interviewed by a religious person, a religious, I suppose, pastor or something, who spoke in tongues a lot of the time, and it was very, very extraordinary. But then suddenly, all the theatre stuff stopped, and she asked him a very direct question about his spiritual beliefs. And there was a silence. And the response came, "I've known this person a long time, and she's a very good person. And basically, I've helped her make a lot of money, and she's very good at the business of doing this." So that question didn't seem to have any place to really land. I mean, that place of wisdom is there, but it was just not available at that point. And I thought, this is really quite worrying, because this is what's happening time and time again, that the powerful people at the top don't have the wisdom. They have the guns, but they don't know when to use them. They should not use them. And for me, the wisdom comes from the meditation and the quietening down and really listening and being present. And I suppose gradually lessening the power of the ego, really.
I just want to say that I'm delighted and surprised to be here, but thank you for the invitation. And I agree with you, Bernard, that wisdom is something that arises from the awareness, the self-realization, the place of silence that is available, but to some people, it's not easy to access. I think when our intelligence in this, I wonder, in this question, are we talking about knowledge? Because I think wisdom has its own intelligence, which is not the intelligence that we associate with knowledge. The knowledge to create the nuclear bomb, or the knowledge that we gain learning, accumulating. As Krishnamurti points out, that knowledge is limited, is by its very nature is limited. And that's not the intelligence that's found of wisdom. When there is wisdom, this higher intelligence moves as us in every new moment. It doesn't accumulate. We don't collect like we do with knowledge. And so the wisdom is fresh, alive, life. Knowledge is limited, stuck. And we can only do so much with our knowledge in that limitation. So is that what we were referring to in this question? Is it knowledge and wisdom? Because that's two different things completely.
I'm Gavin. My relationship to this question is just because I'm reading a book by Krishnamurti called Awakening of Intelligence. And kind of relating to it in that way, it's kind of unknown. There's something unknown about intelligence or wisdom. Where do they grade into each other? And we talk about nature embodying a certain intelligence, perhaps the basic intelligence. And I kind of, when I was young, I kind of related to that book in that sense. How do you relate to nature in a way that you're going beyond your individual self, because we're all part of nature. And certainly that book, it was a book of conversations with people, and they basically opened up that topic of what is intelligence, what is wisdom, and it was an open question, and it's a living movement, and we're part of it. And I suppose it kind of opened me in my life to the realization that you're moving through that as you go through your life. And I think we've all been in that space of, what does that mean for us? What does it mean for society? What does it mean for the wider world and the universe? And if there isn't that inquiry, because it is an inquiry, then you get stuck in what Maria was saying about knowledge. We're talking about the knowledge to make a nuclear bomb or submarine, which is totally, that's the particular. And getting stuck in the particular and just forgetting about the vastness of the mystery of being, of why we're here. And we just apparently seem to be here. It's a mystery. So I see that as being my way of exploring intelligence or wisdom. It's a unknown. It's kind of unknown, unknowable in that sense.
I was looking to some examples of wisdom in politics. It's quite difficult to find, but I found two examples. One was a young woman from the BBC. She was interviewing an MP from the Scottish Nationalist Party, and she was frustrated that she wanted him to take sides. 45,000 people murdered in Gaza. Surely to God you've got to take sides. And his reply was, I do take sides. I'm on the side of peace. The man who's in charge behind the scenes of NATO, when they asked him, how are you going to respond to Donald Trump with his views? And his reply surprised a lot of people. He says, I'm going to listen. I'm going to listen to his concerns first and foremost. These are rare examples of wisdom appearing in politics. We don't see the word wisdom on the news. And for many people reading spiritual literature, it still tends to be a bit on the theoretical side. The people who have got to live in Ukraine, they need a depth of wisdom that is real. It's not a sugar-coated New Age wisdom. And that requires a dedication to being. I'll pass the question on to Bernard.
Yeah, I hear very much what you say and agree with it, David. And I think if you look back over history, if you look at people who are quite famous politicians, and leaders in that way, we think of them historically, but they don't actually have much influence on how we live our lives today. Yet if you go to the spiritual teachers from 2 centuries back, what they brought to us is still living, really. And I think that's really important. And I think one of the problems is that we don't, the way life goes at the moment is that there's no space. Everything is faster and faster and more furious, and people are starting to grab more and more and more because what they've got isn't satisfying. And so more and more and more, faster and faster. Let's not have a gap in case something might come up. And I think in order to get in touch with these qualities, you do have to, although I think when you are in touch with them to a certain extent, you can certainly operate in the world at a certain speed. It doesn't mean you can only sit under the tree and meditate. But in fact, you can go very fast when you're rooted in those qualities. But you can't actually find them unless you allow yourself the space to pull back, really. And I think that's one of the problems we have today.
Maybe a question here is for each of us and everyone listening is, what is wisdom? And can we see it or feel it or know it as something different from the thoughts of what wisdom is? The ideas. Because wisdom is beyond all thought. And that's a question. Where is this wisdom? And David said about the interview, when the politician was asked about taking sides, and he said, I don't take sides. I just want peace. And most people want peace rather than war, conflict. But then another question is, to you and me and everyone, what does peace mean? Is it an idea, an ideal, a thought? Or is peace when we can be together, when we can live together beyond our ideas of you over there and me here, this is mine, that's yours, all of the conflicting ideas that cause war in the first place. It's all very well to say we want peace, but to know peace, to know it in your heart, to feel it as wisdom, then it's alive. It's a movement that's energetic, that has its own intelligence. And words, peace, words feel heavy. And so therefore we can look at what these words that we speak actually mean to us. Because if it's just words, thoughts, ideas, then we're just stirring the same pot. That wisdom arises when we see differently. When we see from that space that Berna describes, where there's silence and stillness, where we can go inward to truly know ourselves outside of our head and our thoughts, to be present with what is. And so it's important, I think, to even just look at what we're saying, what these words mean and where they're coming from, how they feel, whether it just perpetuates the state of stuckness that we're in, or there's something more. There's something more.
And as you were talking, I could just feel that intensity of peace in my heart space. And I think a good question to ask ourselves is, do we have that longing in us to be in that space? Can we sense that longing in our being to be there? And I feel all intelligence is already here, all wisdom is already here. It's just that why is it that we identify and polarize? And when we identify and polarize, we can't see beyond the two sides of the fence. And so the intellect, the intelligence, like we say in the East, the buddhi, it's a great part of creation. It's a great tool. We can analyze things. We can have discernment. But then what is it that generates the thoughts? What is it that chooses the thoughts? If we don't have that, then we got to ask ourselves what or who is really in control. So sit with that intelligence, sit with that wisdom. As an engineer, I'm often conflicted between the two, especially in the corporate world. But just being able to practice, being between the two, I think that's what the world needs more of today.
Yes. Gosh, so many wonderful thoughts floating around this table. Yes, I certainly agree. And I think that wisdom, it arises. It's like, in Buddhist terms, one of the Brahma Viharas, the qualities of compassion and loving kindness. It's not something that you can cultivate. It's not something you can learn about, but it arises when the conditions of the interior stillness is there, and the awareness and the connection. And then it arises, and what comes from it is what is appropriate. There's an appropriateness with wisdom, really, I think. And going on to the thing about peace, of course, so often people see peace as the other side of the coin of war. But what we're dealing with here is a peace that's very different from that. It's not a peace that's solved by carving a map up or putting people in prison or anything like that. It's not that sort of peace at all. And there are, as we know, there are plenty of angry people that go on peace rallies. But it's something different. And I quite like the way that it's expressed in the Christian tradition, where they talk about the peace of God which passeth all understanding. And it's the passeth all understanding that I think is important. We can't really talk about it. We can only, as we've said, have glimpses and of experiencing that.
Thinking what we're talking about so far, I'm aware of the media landscape and how polarizing it is, and that's influencing the world worldwide, and people are becoming polarized and kind of cast adrift. And the response often is to avoid contact with media. And that's kind of what we're doing today, is we're providing media content, but hopefully not just as you would have in the news, unfiltered conflict, confusion, how upset people are, labels of evil and hopes for love and such like. And there has, as Bernard was saying, there has to be another movement, another approach to peace. There's a silence around it, and what we have often today, as we were saying, is a lot of noise and a lot of media noise. Communication often just feels like noise. And as Marie was saying about what is, in the moment, puts you back in contact with just being here as human beings, relating to each other. And that relationship can be in silence. And that has an intelligence about it that we often lose sight of, because daily life can be so noisy so many demands and things. So it doesn't cultivate wisdom.
I think what Jyoti said, the questions that he posed were so interesting. The questions, if I remember right, was this kind of trying to live in our working everyday life with this level of awareness, these thoughts that arise, trying to distinguish or to realize or to see how that mechanism works when a thought arises, so that we can be present as that happens. So as we live our life fully in whatever occupation we have, we do our work, but with this awareness that thoughts will always arise, always here. But we can look when a thought arises, where we go with that thought. When a thought or thoughts are there, can we just be present to the thoughts, or do we become hooked in our thoughts? And we can watch the movement of the emotion, the thoughts, the story that takes us away from awareness. And this is something that's very important, is that we should always be gentle with ourselves. That we're not failing, that we're not actually someone trying to become aware or enlightened, that we already are. And so from that perspective, that I'm already fully aware, and that this thinking, mechanical process of conditioning is dying, is going, because I'm becoming more aware. And so this awareness place, this stabilizes. And so there's not a conflicting movement of, I'm trying to be this person, this job, this life, this, and be this awareness. If we kind of like move our perspective, our perception, and realize that we already are this awareness, and this movement of life, and where we go with it is dependent on how much we invest in our thinking, how much we identify with this person. But it's interesting, and you can try this or not, but it's interesting to see it from I already am this. And this otherness, this other thought, conditioned person, self-created belief system, is secondary to this. And so as this becomes more stable, because I know that I am this, then we can watch, and we're not threatened or conflicted. And so it's the same. Here, being stable in this is the wisdom, is the love, the compassion, the clarity, the aliveness. But we have to live in this world. And so our thoughts, our conditioned self is not a fight. it becomes a deep understanding that this is only a belief system. That this is truly who I am. And so maybe that will help. It certainly helped me, this deep understanding. To really just be gentle with myself. To be caring and loving. That it's not a fight. And it's not a person trying to get to somewhere that I already am. That there's no seeker. Because I am already that. That's wisdom.
We began our topic with a quoted line, mankind is far too clever to survive without wisdom. I don't think the majority of people see the survival of mankind being dependent on wisdom. I thought after writing the quote, people are going to ask me, where did you get that quote? It's from a man called Ernest Schumacher. And I thought I can refer them to the Schumacher Institute in Bristol. But unfortunately, they decided to close it down. The college, with its focus on wisdom and ecology, was the first college to be closed in order to save finance. Our local retreat centre on the outskirts of Glasgow, Campsie Glen, has been closed down. It's now Airbnb and weddings, commercial venture. So this worship in consumerism is spreading. I think most people see the global events as too big. How can I possibly influence these global events? So I feel wisdom needs a space. And my own feeling is that we need education in all schools, not special schools, all schools, where children have at least half an hour a week or a day to relax in inner peace, not as an inner peace associated with any religious way of life, something that's neutral that the children in Mexico and Afghanistan, Sweden, Ukraine, they can get that space. They can learn the space between gadgets. I've been told, I don't know, I can't verify this, but I've been told what we call artificial intelligence, which I think is an unfortunate name, the artificial accelerated information system, can write a book in something like 48 seconds. And we don't see the dangers of this. The people who are designing AI, many of them will tell you that intelligence, the nature of intelligence is mechanistic. They don't know any other intelligence other than the mechanistic. And they don't see the great danger. I know the company called Samsung is inventing robots to help in the nursery. So these robots will instruct the children in the nursery how to sit up straight. Mummy wants you to sit up straight. You have to. So they're teaching young children to obey the commands of robots in the nursery without realizing where that can end up, the dangers of that. So, and also you have the implants which are going to arrive in the next 5 years. You get your computer system as an implant in the brain or an AI system in the brain. Is that what we need? You know, the saying from Eckhart Tolle is, science in the hands of wisdom can be useful to humanity. Science without wisdom will destroy humanity. And Carl Jung, the psychiatrist, pointed out the greatest danger to humanity is modern science. But the technology and the investment is like a racehorse with blinkers racing at high speed towards the edge of a cliff. I looked up some of these little booklets of meditation that can be used in schools, and they're pretty low quality. We need a high quality book that can be used in all schools, 80 pages or so. Even a podcast as small as this, contact can be made with other Buddhist groups, Eckhart groups around the planet to produce from the wisest beings on the planet, produce a book that can be used in all schools. That's not a threat to the Hindu culture, or the Islamic culture, the Christian culture. Just a basic inner peace. So the children have a chance to taste inner peace half an hour a week. It's a real challenge. Obviously, if you look at the American election, there's one. We're not voting in our members of parliament on the basis of wisdom. It's the basis of the dollar or power or confidence, the confident leadership, But we need practical solutions. I hope that doesn't sound too much like a soapbox.
I'm so glad you talked about children, because out of the mouths of babes, And children are so much closer to that source of wisdom because they haven't been indoctrinated. So to be able to cultivate it and stop it being covered up in them at that young age is really, I think, so very important, really. And thinking about children, this is a bit lighter. It suddenly reminded me of what I think is a really lovely description of the difference between intelligence and wisdom, and it comes from Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh and Piglet and Rabbit are lost in the sandpit in the big forest. Now, Rabbit, as we know, is very clever and very talkative, and Pooh is the bear with very little brain. And so Rabbit is organising how they're going to find their way out of this, and he keeps leading them on marches that bring them back to exactly the place that they started from. And so Pooh says, well, maybe I've been thinking that perhaps we could, if we went in the way we thought that was wrong, it might actually be right. And Rabbit said, well, don't see any goodness to that at all. So Pooh said, well, why don't you just try? Go the other way, Rabbit. And so Rabbit stomps off the wrong way, and Pooh and Piglet sit there and they wait for 20 minutes, and then it's obvious that Rabbit has found the way out. And Pooh says to Piglet, right, Piglet, let's go home. And Piglet says, do you know the way? He said, well, yes, but Rabbit talked the whole time and I couldn't hear. I've got 7 pots of honey calling me from my cupboard. And now that it's quiet, I think I can hear them and we can go home.
That's wonderful. Yes, that's wonderful, Bernard. In the silence, he heard his honey. Yes, in the silence, we hear honey. And we know our way. That was beautiful. Yeah. I think also, just talking of children, I agree completely with the importance of what David says and Bernard. But I also think that right now, our young people seem to be more aware, more open to seeing that this is just not right. They have questions that need to be answered. Really valid, important questions. And they have this energy behind these questions that will move them to find the answers. And I think this is life evolving. And so it's not doom and gloom and whatever, because we have this other, it feels like an alive force from our younger people that will open our minds, or maybe not, depending on your availability to be open. But there is potential. There is this force, this grace, this newness that's available. And I truly believe that that's why we're having these conversations, these podcasts, these groups, these moments, these sharings, more than ever, at a very deep level, because everything has to and is breaking apart.
I think in general, hopefully young people can tune into the mismatch between science and wisdom, in the sense that there's a growing awareness that consciousness can't be explained by science, because science is a materialistic, reductionistic way of analysing everything. And the same with life. It's generally thought in the population, because surveys have been done, the population, that people think that scientists have actually produced life in a laboratory. Something like 60% of people surveyed think that something as complex as a frog. When the reality is no one knows how to make life from chemicals. And there's also the notion that the universe in some way is mechanical, vast, but also dead. And that's a notion within science as well. And artificial intelligence, the notion is that they can produce artificial consciousness, they can produce artificial life. And if that is the guiding certainty of our society going forward, when actually reality is that there's no certainty there at all, there's no actuality. The media is going to promote this notion of we know everything, we know that artificial intelligence can produce the society that we need. Scientists have got it all figured out. We can't question them because we don't know enough. We don't know enough. Not enough knowledge. But if you dig underneath, there's ignorance that isn't being uncovered. And I hope going forward, in terms of education, David was saying, that should be part of education. To be able to question those things, those beliefs. It's like a dogma in an organised religion.
Well, we're coming near the end of our dialogue today. The recommended book for today is called The Silence of the Mind. It's a translation from Romanian, and the author is called Ili Chiora. It's recommended by the president of the Ramana Maharshi Foundation. His style of writing is like a mixture between Eckhart Tolle and Krishnamurti. The interesting thing was he lived in Romania at the time that it was invaded by the Russians, and nobody was allowed to read any spiritual books. A few people mentioned that his writing style was very close to Krishnamurti, but he didn't have the chance to see the comparison until he was an older man. I found his statement interesting. He was greatly impressed by Krishnamurti's insights and greatly unimpressed by his followers. But I'd like to finish with a quote from Ili. If you can keep in mind the title of the book, The Silence of the Mind, and the quote is, "Living in the now, the mind is wisdom." We'll finish up this podcast with a poem from Rumi You are the magic of the moment. You are the freshness of the snow. I am the dust that dances in the sunlight. I am the breath of an evening breeze. Together, quiet as the moonlight, we feel the breeze that carries the ocean. We share the stillness of the sea fog resting against the night cliff. We hear the hoofbeats leave the monastery of time. For we are the night ocean, filled with glints of light. We are the space between the fish and the moon, as we sit here together, you and I. We are the magic of the moment. We are the freshness of the snow. We are the stars that circulate the moonlight, two night birds drifting on an evening breeze.